My sister wore my promotion letter like it was her own skin. Not just the idea, not just the pitch. The actual document I had drafted, revised 17 times, and left on the kitchen table the night before my meeting with the regional director. She took the folder, retyped it in her own font, and walked into that office 40 minutes before I did. I didn't scream. I didn't call her out in front of anyone. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 6 minutes, reading the text my coworker had just sent me, and I made one decision. I would let it play out. What happened, 72 hours later, changed everything, and I want to tell you exactly how it unfolded, from the beginning, so you understand why I didn't fight back the way everyone expected me to. I'm 31 years old. I've worked at the same regional logistics company for 4 years, starting as a junior coordinator and working my way to senior analyst. It wasn't glamorous. It was spreadsheets at midnight, client calls I took from my car during lunch, and a performance review every 6 months where I heard the same thing. Outstanding, on track, leadership potential. What I never heard was, promoted. My sister is 28. She joined the company 14 months ago, same company, different department, because my mother thought it would be good for us to support each other. My sister has always been the one my parents introduced first at dinner parties, the one whose college graduation photo sits framed on the living room wall, the one my dad calls our achiever. I love her. That's the part that makes this so hard to say out loud. I genuinely, completely love my sister, which is exactly why I spent 3 years quietly covering for her, mentoring her, answering her 11 p.m. text about client formatting and quarterly reports. I thought we were building something together. I thought the foundation was solid. I didn't realize I was building a ladder for her to climb over me. The promotion had been in conversation for 8 months. The regional director, a measured and fair woman I'd always respected, told me directly in December that I was the frontrunner for the new operations manager position. She said she needed a formal proposal, a restructuring plan for the Midwest division by mid-April, presented in person. I spent 11 weeks on that proposal. Nights, weekends, one canceled trip with my friends in March that I still owe them an apology for. The document was 43 pages. It covered workflow restructuring, cost reduction projections, 3 staffing models with risk analysis for each. I knew it was good. I knew it was the best work I'd ever done. The night before my presentation, I printed the full document, put it in a labeled folder on the kitchen table so I wouldn't forget it in the morning rush, and went to bed at midnight feeling, for the first time in months, like things were exactly where they needed to be. I woke up at 6:15, made coffee, went to the kitchen. The folder was gone. I assumed I'd moved it without thinking, that half-asleep version of myself that does things I don't remember. I checked the counter, my bag, the couch, my home office. Nothing. I was running slightly late, so I pulled the file from my laptop instead, printed a fresh copy at the office, and told myself I'd find the folder later. I arrived at the office at 8:43. My presentation was scheduled for 10. At 9:07, my coworker stopped by my desk with a look I didn't immediately know how to read. She said, almost carefully, "Did you know your sister has a meeting with director this morning?" She came in early. Like really early. I remember the exact sensation, not panic, not anger. Something quieter and colder than both. A kind of clarity that arrives when the worst thing you hoped wasn't true turns out to be exactly true. I asked my coworker what time the meeting started. 8:30, she said. She had a big folder with her. I nodded. I thanked her. I went to the bathroom, stood at the sink for 90 seconds, and looked at myself in the mirror. I thought about every late-night text I'd answered, every draft I'd reviewed for her, every time my mother said, "Your sister just needs a little more time to find her footing," and I said, "Of course, I understand." I thought about what I wanted to do, and then I thought about what would actually work. I went back to my desk. I opened my email and forwarded myself the complete version history of the proposal document, including the metadata showing 43 saves over 11 weeks. The first draft dated January 9th. The last revision time-stamped the previous night at 11:58 p.m. I took screenshots of the drafts saved in my company cloud folder with my employee ID attached. I sent everything to my personal email. Then I went to my 10 o'clock meeting. Director greeted me warmly. I presented. I knew the material so well by then that I didn't need notes. I walked through every section, answered every question, and watched her face carefully. She was engaged. She was nodding. But there was something slightly muted about her energy that I couldn't place until the end, when she said, "This is impressive work. I'd like a few days to compare some of the approaches before I finalize." Compare. That word sat in my chest the whole drive home. My sister beat me home by 20 minutes. She was in the kitchen making tea when I walked in, and she turned around with this expression, not guilt, not quite something more complicated. Rehearsed, almost. "How did it go?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "How did yours go?" She paused just a half-second too long. "Really well, actually. I think she liked it." I looked at her. She looked at me. We both knew. She turned back to the kettle. I went to my room, closed the door, and called the one person I knew would help me think rather than react, my college roommate, now a paralegal in Chicago, who I've trusted with exactly 3 genuine crises in my adult life. She picked up on the second ring. I told her everything. She asked 2 questions. "Do you have documented proof the work is yours? And does your company have an internal ethics policy?" Yes and yes. She told me not to confront my sister. Not yet. She told me to build the case quietly, the way you'd build anything that needs to hold weight. I want to pause here and answer the question I know some of you are asking. Why didn't I just walk into director's office the next morning and say what happened? Because I'd watched what happens when women in my office speak up without evidence. I'd seen a colleague report a documentation issue 2 years ago and spend the next 6 months being quietly sidelined. I'd heard the word difficult used about women who were simply accurate. I knew that walking in with nothing but my word against my sister's would not get me the promotion. It might get me labeled. I wasn't willing to trade my career for a moment of being right. I wanted to be right and have the paperwork to prove it. Over the next 3 days, I pulled everything. The version history I'd already saved, emails between me and 2 external consultants I'd contacted during the research phase, both dated February and March, a calendar invite from November showing the first scoping session I'd had with my own manager, who knew about the project from the start. One of the consultants, when I explained the situation, immediately offered to write a brief statement confirming the timeline of our work together. My manager, not director, but my direct supervisor, a quiet man who had been at the company for 12 years and had exactly 0 patience for internal politics, sat with me for 40 minutes on Wednesday afternoon. He looked through everything I showed him without saying much. At the end, he said, "I knew about this project in November. I have emails that say so. You want me to loop in HR?" I said yes. That same evening, my mother called. She'd heard from my sister I didn't know the exact version, but I could tell from the first sentence what angle had been chosen. My mother opened with, "I just want to understand what's happening at work, because your sister is very upset." I let her finish. She said my sister felt I had been deliberately trying to undermine her confidence by pursuing the same position. She said it looked like I was trying to make her look bad. She said, and this is the one I keep coming back to, "You've always been more established. You didn't need to compete with her on this one." I stayed calm. I said, "Mom, I started this project in January. I have 11 weeks of documentation. I'll let the process play out." She said, "I hope you're not going to make this into something that divides this family." I said, "I'm not the one who took something that wasn't mine." There was a long silence. Then she said she needed to go, and she'd call me later. She didn't call me later. My dad texted that night. Just 4 words. "Please be the bigger person." I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. On Thursday morning, HR confirmed they had received the documentation package from my manager. They opened a formal internal review. Standard procedure. They said they'd need to speak with both me and my sister, review the materials, and present findings to the director within 2 weeks. My sister did not come home that night. She stayed at a friend's place, I found out later. My mother called me Friday morning to tell me not to check on me, but to let me know my sister was devastated and humiliated, and that I had chosen a process over family. I want you to understand something. That sentence, "chosen a process over family," was the one that almost broke me. Not because it was true, but because I had spent so many years believing that keeping the peace was the same thing as being loved. That absorbing unfairness quietly was what good daughters did. That when the people who were supposed to protect you decided to protect each other instead, the graceful response was to step back and say it's fine. I had been saying it's fine for 31 years. I was done. The HR review took 11 days. I went to work every day. I did my job. I was professional and calm in every interaction with my sister when she returned to the office, which she did after 3 days, and which was visibly, painfully awkward for everyone in the vicinity. I did not discuss the review with colleagues. I did not post anything. I did not call my mother back until she called me twice more, and when I did, I said, "I love you. I'm not going to discuss the work situation until it's resolved. I hope you understand." She did not understand. But she also couldn't argue with it. The findings came back on a Tuesday. I was called into a meeting with HR and director together. The documentation established clearly that the proposal originated with me version history, external consultant correspondence, manager records all aligned on a consistent timeline. My sister had submitted what was, in the findings' careful language, a substantially reproduced document without attribution or authorization. Director looked at me across the table and said, "I owe you an apology for not catching this sooner." I told her I appreciated that. The outcome: I was formally offered the operations manager position that afternoon. My sister was placed on a performance improvement plan and moved to a different team. HR advised that further action was at the company's discretion and would depend on the improvement plan results. My phone had 23 missed calls by the time I walked out of that meeting. My mother, my dad, my sister's number, twice. 2 aunts I hadn't spoken to in 8 months. 23. I sat in my car in the parking garage, the same garage where I had read that first text 11 days earlier, and I went through them one by one. I didn't listen to the voicemails right away. I just looked at the numbers and thought about what it meant, that not one of those calls had come in during the 11 days. I was quietly building my case. Not one check-in. Not one, "How are you holding up?" Only now, when there was a result, did the phone start ringing. I called my best friend first. She answered on the first ring and said, "Tell me everything." I talked for 40 minutes. I cried once, briefly, not from sadness, but from the specific exhaustion of having held something heavy for a long time and finally being allowed to put it down. Then I called my mother back. She answered immediately. Her first words were, "I hope you know what you've done to this family." I let her finish. She said my sister might lose her job. She said the family would never be the same. She said she didn't understand how I could do this to someone I loved. When she stopped, I said, "Mom, I spent 11 weeks building something." She took it. I didn't invent the documentation, it existed because the work was mine. I went through the proper process. Everything that happened after that was a consequence of her choice, not mine. Silence. Then, "She's your sister." "I know," I said. "She'll always be my sister. That's also why this hurts as much as it does. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them take from you. It doesn't mean pretending something didn't happen to keep the table comfortable at Thanksgiving." My mother didn't respond to that. I told her I loved her. I told her I was going to need some time before I could be in the same room with everyone and be okay. I told her I wasn't cutting anyone off. I was just asking for the same patience she'd always asked me to extend to everyone else. She said she'd have to think about all of this. I said that was fair. We hung up. I started the operations manager role 3 weeks later. It's harder than I expected, and more satisfying than I can fully articulate. I have a team of 6 now. I've already implemented 2 of the restructuring ideas from the original proposal. The Midwest numbers are up. My sister and I have spoken twice since brief. Careful conversations that felt like walking across a floor you're not sure will hold. I don't know what we are to each other right now. I think we're both still figuring that out. There's grief in that. Real grief. The kind that doesn't look dramatic enough from the outside for people to recognize as grief. But it's there. What I know is this. The version of me who would have said it's fine would have lost that promotion. She would have gone home, eaten something she didn't taste, lain awake staring at the ceiling, and by morning talked herself into believing that keeping the peace was the same thing as winning. It isn't. Silence is not the same as safety. Patience is not the same as acceptance. And choosing yourself documenting, building, going through the process with your head down and your evidence organized is not the same as being difficult. It is the most precise and powerful form of self-respect there is. If there is one thing I want you to take from this, it's not the outcome. The outcome was mine. It belongs to this specific set of circumstances, this timeline, these 11 weeks and 11 days and 23 missed calls. What belongs to you is the principle underneath it. When someone takes from you quietly, expecting you to absorb it quietly, you are allowed to be louder than they planned for. You are allowed to build a case. You are allowed to let the process run and stand at the end of it without apology. You do not owe anyone your silence about the truth. The folder was on the kitchen table. Now it's on the public record. And my name is the only one on it.